Welcome back to Skating Theory. My guest today is Rory Linkletter, a professional athlete who recently ran the Paris Olympic Marathon and the New York Marathon. Rory's current personal best in the marathon is an impressive 2 hours, 8 minutes, and 1 second, which makes him the top Canadian marathon runner and the third best Canadian performance ever. This episode, as you might guess, is quite different from the others. I wanted to talk to Rory because he inspired me greatly when I went to Paris to watch the race. But most importantly, I am convinced that there is much we can learn from professional athletes, especially marathon runners. In our conversation, we explore how Rory scaled his mental and physical abilities. I draw many parallels with the academic and policy worlds, delving into what we can learn from his process, the power laws that he has identified, and his relationship with science. Skating Theory is not turning into a running podcast, but true to its mission, it remains focused on exploring the skating laws behind everything, be it economic, technical, or biological systems. Rory opens new doors regarding this last subject. I hope you enjoy our discussion. So again, thank you so very much for coming on a podcast. I've been following you for quite some time, so it's a real pleasure. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. What I've done is that I have divided the conversation in 4 different parts. In part 1, I want to talk about you. And more specifically, I want to learn about your backgrounds and your aspirations and, where you're coming from. In part 2, I want to talk about how you have scaled your mental abilities. So that's the mental toughness, to use terms that are familiar to people running marathons here. In part 3, I want to talk about how you have scaled your physical abilities, which obviously, if you run that fast, you probably went through a very long process, and I want to know if there is something here for us. And then we'll conclude. I have 1 or 2 fun questions. So on that, starting with part 1 and the introduction, I guess the most obvious question, but it would be a shame for me not to ask that, is when did you start running?
Yeah, so I started running at a time that's pretty common here in North America. Once you get up to the high school age, so grades 9, grades 10, whatever, when you start joining your school teams. I got to grade 9 and wanted to play a lot of other, American sports like baseball, basketball, football, but I was a pretty small and undersized kid, so I wasn't really on track to make those teams as a youngin. So I decided with one of my friends to try this thing called cross country so I could participate in a sport at the school. And I had no idea what cross country was at the time, but I went to the first practice. We ran 6 kilometers and I wasn't very good at it, but we did it and I finished. And, it was one of those things where I remember I told my mom I was going to run cross country, and she said, because we had to get up early every morning all summer long to beat the heat here it was in Utah at the time. She was like, "You're not going to last the whole summer. There's no way you're going to get up every morning at 6 a.m. all summer and go to run," because I'd never done that before, but I did. I carried on for the rest of my days as of now.
Yeah, so talking about that, getting up very early, fast forward to today, can you take us through what is a typical week, day by day? When do you wake up? And I know obviously it depends on whether you have a race coming up. We'll talk about that later. But if you had to generalize a little bit, what is a typical week for you?
Yeah, so to add some context, I am a father of two young kids, so there's not a lot of sleeping in our house. Kids are usually up and at 'em around 6:30 a.m. So usually I get up either right around the time they do or shortly after because they wake me up. So usually on a normal day, get up, drink some coffee, eat some food, head out the door for a run here in Flagstaff, Arizona, where I'm training at the moment, where I've been for the last 5, 6 years. There's a lot of amazing places to run, but I often drive to my favorite places, and that's part of my morning routine. Go for anywhere between 12 to 20K on a normal day in the morning. And then I usually run again in the afternoon. That's on an easy day. And on harder days, there's maybe a little bit more of a regimen of, you know, timing my wake up time to when my workout starts, practicing the things I will do for a race. But yeah, it's pretty cyclical with a, 8:30 a.m. run, rest slash hang out, refuel when I get home, and then head out the door again around 3 p.m. and rinse and repeat. It's a lot of 2 runs a day. It's a lot of consistency of just putting in a lot of boring running. I think it's fun, but it's
Yeah.
it's monotonous.
And so when you do train for a marathon, I mean, I guess you're always training, but when there is a race that is scheduled and coming, how many kilometers, or I guess how many miles are you typically running on a weekly basis?
Yeah, so in marathon training, I would say the average is between 180 to 200 kilometers a week, or 110 to 125 miles per week. That's kind of become my sweet spot. There's certainly, in my mind, room to expand on that, run more if I feel like I can find the energy. But I always, instead of aiming for a specific weekly total or daily total, I'm of the opinion that I should really listen to my day by day ability. So I would say I wake up, it's Tuesday morning, I just worked out or did a long run the day before, 2 days before, and I feel fatigue in my body. As I set out the door, I might have a range of runs distances that I might do on that day. So maybe if I feel really good, I'll run 20K, and maybe if I don't, I'll run 13, 14K.
Yeah. So is my understanding correct that you don't have a coach coming with you uh, on site for the trainings?
On the hard days, workout days where I'm running pace specific stuff, I do have a coach present. But on easy days, mileage, my you know easy aerobic runs, those are alone and left to my discretion on how I use them.
Okay. Okay. And just for the sake of it, when you say easy, do you know what will be the pace in minute per kilometer or minute per miles?
Yeah. So I'm not at high altitude, over 2,000 meters above sea level. I run a lot of dirt roads that are rocky, rolling terrain. And on an average day, it's probably between 420 to 430 per K. That's like easy aerobic running.
Yeah. All right. Okay, good. Yeah, easy. Now let's talk about the Olympic marathon that you run in the summer of 2024 in Paris. I came to Paris. I live in Amsterdam now, but for the purpose of watching you and all the other runners. So you probably heard me scream at some point without knowing me yet. But tell us about the qualification process. So what is it like knowing that you are Canadian? So it's way different, I suppose, than what people have to go through in the US, which is already way different from what people have to go through in France. So what steps did you have to take in order to secure your selection?
Yeah. So it all depends. Athletics Canada will usually release, which is our governing body for athletics within Canada. They will release like a selection criteria. It's usually pretty straightforward in the sense that it's like, hey, we're going to take the 3 people that we think are the best, and there's usually an objective measurement of time or place at certain races that help dictate that. And for this last Olympics, because the Olympic standard was so much harder and faster than it had ever been, it was very unlikely that more than 3 Canadians were going to run that Olympic standard. So for me, in a very practical sense, I just basically said, go try to run this standard and you'll probably be on this Olympic team. And so I chose the Seville Marathon in Spain in February of this year, 2024, to go after that time because I'd looked at previous year's results. And I think in 2023, like 208 would have gotten you 15th place or something at this race. So it's deep, super, super deep, highly competitive field. Lots of people running at the time I'm aiming to run. So I literally had never seen Seville, never talked to anyone who had ever run Seville, just looked at these results and was like, this race seems like a really good place to run 208 just based on results from years past. And so sight unseen, I got into the race, booked the travel, made a plan leading up to that race that I thought was a really sound plan. I gave myself a long runway of training to get ready for it. And I ran 208.01, which was 9 seconds under the Olympic standard of 208.10. And when I hit the finish line, I knew that there was a very, very high likelihood, like almost certain that I had just qualified for the Olympics, but I had to hold my breath for a few months until the qualification period closed so that I was certain that, 3 other Canadians weren't going to be faster than that time.
Yeah, which is a huge difference compared to amateurs such as myself, where when I play tennis or any other sports, I do play against someone, right? And I want to beat that person.
Yes.
When I run a marathon, I'm running against myself, really. And if the person next to me does his PR, well, even better, right? Then we all celebrate. But I guess for you, it is back to running against some people. Is that the way you see marathons, or are you more like in the if we can all make it, then great?
Yeah, I think that there's a place for both mindsets. In Seville, more the merrier. Let's all run fast. Let's all work together. Let's try to do our best, and hopefully we can all run the Olympic standard here today and make the Olympic teams for our respective countries. Which there was a very diverse European field in Seville, so I remember I ran most of the race stride for stride with a British runner named Phil Sessman. And we both hit the standard on that day, and we'd run most of it together, and we celebrated together, and we became, casual acquaintances because of that shared experience of like striving for something that was a big, big, big goal for both of us. And we both ended up on our Olympic teams, him for the Great Britain and me for Canada. And yeah, that was a day where, Phil Sessman's performance was only going to help mine. And that's a pretty cool thing when it comes down to that. But there are races, and this happens very often in the professional world, where someone running their best in front of you may mean you get less prize money, you miss a placement goal, and I could get into the nuances of how professional running contracts work, but let's say my contract has a incentive to place a certain place at a certain race. And then it is about beating other people. It is strictly about competing and trying to run as fast as I can and beat the people around me. And I would say, aside from trying to qualify for the Olympics, this sport is about competing against others.
Yeah. All right. So talking about placing in a good position, you recently completed the New York Marathon with a very impressive 2 hours 11 minutes. And you finished 15th, which is amazing. And in fact, I watched the marathon on TV, and you led the first half pretty much, which got me very excited. My question is whether this was a strategic decision or if it was based on how you felt during the day.
Yeah, so kind of a little bit of both. I have a philosophy or a theory that, if the pace is going to be slow in a big marathon like that, where the field is super, super talented, full of the best runners in the world, Olympic gold medalist, Olympic silver medalist, Boston Marathon champ, New York City Marathon champ, there's a bunch of studs in this race, right? And if we're going to run a pace that I could comfortably run, which at that time we're running like 3:05 per K, which is a little slower than my personal best pace, I was like, I might as well be towards the front because it kind of gives you a little bit of energy because you feel like you're in it. Whereas if you sit in the back, there's two things that can happen. You can kind of feel a little bit non-engaged with the race. And another thing is if surges happen, which at New York is very famous for how inconsistent the pacing is on the course. As surges happen, if you're in the back, you have a delayed response time because you don't feel the moves as they're happening. It kind of has an accordion effect. And if you're at the front, you can feel it as it starts. You can respond a little bit more gradually without losing connection to the group. When I was in the back of the group and these surges were happening, what would happen is I would get gapped by 5-10 meters, and then I'd have to work extra hard to get back into the group. But if I'm at the front and those surges happen, I can maintain my pace, maybe go just a touch faster. And what happens is instead of sliding off the group, I slide from the front of the group to the back of the group, and I'm still connected. So it's kind of just, it is a little bit of a strategic play, a strategic decision. It is a little bit of how I felt at the time, but it's really just kind of reading the atmosphere and the environment. And I personally am a guy that I get a lot of energy from being up at the front and feeling like I'm in the fight.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So indeed, a bit of both. For the record, I was in New York just last week and ran a couple times in Central Park. I mean, wow, those are hills. I mean, keep in mind that even Amsterdam, where it's very flat, but that does not appear to be very obvious on TV, but it's not at all a flat arrival. So kudos to you and to all the people out there. All right, let's move on to part 2, in which we discuss your mental abilities and how you've scaled that from being just a regular boy to an Olympic marathon runner. When did you have the idea of running a marathon for the first time? When did you cross your mind? Was it when you were, as you said, in high school doing cross country, or was it something that took a bit longer for you to process?
Yeah, I think as soon as you enter the sport of running, you're aware of the marathon because it kind of holds a very special place in our sport. It's kind of the event as far as like the lay person knows what the marathon means. They know the marathon by name. It stands out. Marathon 5K. Marathon has a much stronger name than 5K run, you know? So I was aware of it from an early age, but I don't think I really started entertaining the idea of becoming a marathoner until I got to university at BYU, where I went, and there was a guy that had just finished his eligibility but was still hanging around the team and training with us by the name of Jared Ward. Jared Ward, U.S. Olympian in 2016. I got to BYU in 2014, so he was just starting his marathon career, and Jared is an outstanding individual, an amazing guy, and he really mentored a lot of us younger athletes as we came onto the team. Kind of went out of his way to make sure we felt welcome, and he's just a great role model to have around. And I got to watch him go from this aspiring professional marathoner to one of the best of his little period of time as a professional in the US, where he got 6th place at the Olympic marathon. He finished top 8 at World Marathon Majors 3 or 4 times and had a lot of really, really cool, exciting moments. So I think when I started watching Jared Ward, that was when I was like, the marathon is calling me, because this is my role model, my hero in a lot of ways in the sport. And he makes it look like a really good time.
Yeah. And it's indeed quite a crowd there at BYU with Clayton Young and Connor Menst. So I guess it was a good place to be. And as I understand, you got inspired by them to run the first marathon. And when is it that you actually did it and covered the distance?
I ran my first marathon right out of university in 2019. I ran the Toronto Waterfront Marathon as my debut. At the time, it was strictly because the 2020 Olympics were looming, and I wanted to try to give myself a chance to make the Tokyo Olympic team. So I was like, well, I think my best chance is in the marathon, so I'm just going to jump right from university running, 5K, 10K specialist to the marathon, and I did so that fall.
And when is it that you actually dreamed of becoming a professional athlete? Was it something that was always there, kind of? Or is that something that came gradually as your performance improved?
So growing up, I wanted to be a professional athlete my entire life. I kid you not. From the moment I was able to decide what I wanted to be when I grew up, it was first, I wanted to be a hockey player growing up in Canada. And then when I came to the US as a young kid, it maybe switched to basketball or baseball. I love sports. I always, glorified the idea of becoming an athlete because these were my heroes, right? Like this is what I loved. I was so passionate about it. And when I got to high school and joined cross country and track, I didn't really know what professional running was. I didn't have a great idea of what it meant to be a pro runner until probably my grade 12 senior year of high school. Then maybe like I was a good enough runner in high school that I knew I was going to run in college. And I knew after college, if you were good, you had a chance to run professionally. So that's when it started to enter my brain. But it didn't become a reality until after my third year at BYU, maybe second year at BYU. I started to stand out on that team. And I knew at BYU, the best runners at BYU often went professional post collegiately. So once I started to be one of the best guys on the BYU team, that's when it was like, well, I'm on track for what other people coming through this program have gone on to become professionals.
Yeah. All right. Very clear. Now, still looking at the mental part of your activity, some listeners may not be familiar with the concept of a training block, which typically spans 12 to 16 weeks and aims to peak your performance on a specific day. Now, my question is this: do you design your training with a singular focus on a race and trust that over time it will contribute to your mental readiness? Or when you design your training, do you also structure it in a way to achieve long-term mental improvement?
I think a little bit of both. Like obviously the very simple approach is let's get as fit as we can for one day. But I think every marathon block, every training block builds on itself. So in a way, the previous block is helping your launching off point of the next block. So I definitely think we are constantly like looking behind us at what we've learned from our previous performances, whether it be mistakes in race, mistakes in training, success in training, success in race, and then also projecting to our ceiling and our potential. I think most professional runners would tell you that they do it because they want to see how far, how fast, how good they can be at this sport. And so you do have to have kind of this long term vision while still staying grounded in the present moment. And, all I can do to get where I want to go 5 years from now is what I have to do today. I can't be thinking about what I'm going to do even a week from now. Really. I mean, it's constantly, we're humans. We do project, we do think about the future, but all I can do is the task that is right in front of me at the very moment. So after this podcast, I've got a nice easy run. I'm just coming back into training. I can't go get better at running today in the sense of like crushing my personal bests in training and such, but I can, go do what I'm supposed to do today that sets up tomorrow so that I can build on it.
Yeah. And so if we are to look at, and this will be the bridge to part 3 of the conversation, the connection between your mental abilities and your physical abilities, obviously you are running faster today than you were 2 years ago. Would you also say that the improvement in your mental abilities have been parallel to the one in your physical abilities? Or would you say it is actually better, you are better mentally than you were at the time, physically? I mean, how do you see the relationship between?
Yeah. So I think experience has been the largest catalyst in my improvement in the marathon specifically. And so that's more mental than it is physical. There is a physical aspect to experience, like what the body feels like at certain stages in the race. But I think more than anything is this understanding of what a race can and will bring to you, like all the different challenges that can occur. And I remember early in my marathon career, I was struggling. I was really, really struggling with the duration of the race. Mentally, I'm a high energy guy, so it's kind of like, to use an analogy, you don't want to burn too bright too early. You only have there's a lot of burning analogies in marathons. You only have a certain amount of matches you can strike within the race. So don't burn too many too early. Don't burn the candle at both ends, all these fun little analogies but it's true. The marathon is this slow, gradual burn. And if you spike too much too early or do things that are a detriment to how long you can last in the race, you will falter. You will fall apart because it's like it's a cliff, right? Like you don't just like gradually slow. Usually you can hit a wall and it can almost stop you in your tracks if you go too hard too early. And I was doing this consistently in my first 3-4 marathons. I could not figure out how to finish a marathon running my fastest. And then I started to really be able to scale my efforts and do things in a way that allowed me to run better and better in the last 10K of the race, which if you've watched a marathon broadcast, I feel like every announcer loves to mention how the last 10K is where the race begins, because it's true. A lot of people can get into 32K, 30K and still be okay. But it's like, what do you have left is the question. And so, my most recent marathons that have been my most successful ones have always been ones where I was able to mentally stay engaged and control my efforts all the way until 10K to go, and then have a couple matches to strike still and attack the last 10K.
It's funny because I ran the Amsterdam Marathon about a month ago, and I've always heard about that 30K wall and never experienced that before. And I started for the very first time in my life to cramp. And then I could watch on the video then that I passed the sign 30K and then it was a tiny bridge. And it's exactly when I started to cramp. So the wall was very real and, well positioned at that 30K mark. So it is something real. But let me ask, how do you, or I guess, are you able to always resist that feeling that when you start a race, you may feel exceptionally good today, and therefore, well, it might be my chance to do a PB. I mean, how do you deal with that? Can you manage your expectation and slow down on purpose, or would you sometimes go with the flow and be tempted to think, well, maybe today is the day, and if I hit the wall, I hit the wall?
Usually you have a general race plan and strategy before the race starts, so there's no changing your mind in the moment based on there are exceptions, like for example the New York City Marathon, the one I just ran, doesn't have a very predictable race because there's no pacers, the course is difficult, it's ever changing, there's fast parts, there's slow parts and all that stuff. So you have to have a real open mind of what can happen out there. Let's use a contrast here. Seville Marathon, flat, fast time trial. I knew I wanted to run 2:08:10. There was no world where I was going to try to run something that wasn't going to set me up for 2:08:10. Even if I felt amazing, I wasn't going to go run 63 minutes through the first half because that's faster than I need to be. And we know through data, through world record, times, more often than not, the best course of action is an evenly split race. So, running your efforts very even throughout so that you don't hit that wall. So I generally would say, because I know the path to the highest level of performance is, to really hold yourself back for a long time and then unleash late, that I'm pretty good at ignoring any sort of impulses I may have in the race. One of my old coaches, Coach Ed Eyestone at BYU, coaches current Olympians Connor Mance and Clayton Young, used to say the marathon is patience followed by destruction. And it's just like this thing, it can go one of two ways. You can be patient and then you can be the one forcing destruction on others, or you can not be patient and the destruction will be done unto you. So it's definitely, it rewards those that are able to kind of read where their body is and control themselves and their impulses.
Yeah. And I think there is a lot there for academics, entrepreneurs. I mean, people not running marathons, or maybe they are on the side, but as the way they approach their endeavors as well, right? Equal splits may be better than a very fast one where you say, well, if I slow down on the second one, it'd be fine, because actually you hit the wall and you won't be fine,
Yeah.
most likely. Let me move on to now the part 3 of the discussion, where we move to your physical abilities and how you have scaled those abilities and how you are scaling those. And let me now here reintroduce the concept of a power law. So it's not power in the sense of I have power and you do not, but it's power in the sense of raising to the power of something. Now, my question is this: have you noticed any power laws in your careers, which would be, I guess, practices or habits that consistently drove improvement, and where you see that the more you engage in those practices, the more progress seems to come naturally?
Yeah. So as you were asking the question, something popped right in my head, and it's periodization. So what that means in marathon training and in really any sort of physical training is going through phases of training and periodizing things so that you're adding elements or taking elements away in certain phases of your training. So what that means is, say I have a marathon 16 weeks from now, or let's even go further back, 6 months from now. Let's say I'm going to run a marathon in May of 2025. What I would do is I'd work backwards from the date of the marathon, and I would say, okay, what do I need to do to be ready in 6 months, and what should I avoid doing now so that I can add those layers in later, so I can be building on something. And what has worked really well for me specifically is phasing from speed work into marathon work. So that may sound a little counterintuitive. Usually in endurance sports, they like to flip that on the other way, where you're doing base training and then speed work to get stronger first and then sharpen. But for the marathon, I kind of reverse engineer the approach and work on my speed, work on the things that I cannot work on while marathon training to improve my ceiling and my floor. So, for example, before I qualified for the Paris Olympic Games earlier this year, I ran my fastest ever 1 mile race 3 months before, because I had focused on my speed for, a 4 to 6 week block. I raced about an 8K road race and a 1 mile track race in that first block, where I was completely focused on improving my speed. And for marathoners, speed is like speed endurance, right? So the mile, the 5K, the 10K. And so I ran a 3:59 mile December 3rd or 4th of 2023. And then 3 months later, 2 months later, ran the best half marathon of my life. So that's the second phase, a little longer, a little bit more endurance based, but still on the faster end of my pace ranges. And then a month after that was when I ran the Seville Marathon and ran my fastest ever marathon. So I worked backwards, started at the lower end, the speed side, and got stronger as the block went, added volume, added duration in training runs, frequency. My volume went from probably 110 to 120K a week, all the way up to that 200K a week over that stretch of time when I was transitioning my focus in training.
So does it mean that these days you are doing some speed work because you just run New York and are going through the same cycle again?
Not yet, but yes, I will. So I'm on the reset phase of my next periodization. So after every peak, I think it's beneficial hormonally, physically, to hit a hard reset. You have to do it at least once a year. You can do a soft reset, throughout the year a couple times where you take a down week. But because I ran the Olympics this year, I ran New York, I ran Seville, I was kind of going hard all year. I planned this break post New York to be my hard reset. So last week was the week after the race. I ran 3 runs of like 20 to 30 minutes in duration. And that was like trying to just like keep my legs engaged with running so that they didn't forget, my tendons didn't get weak, but doing as little as possible to allow my body to reset in every capacity. And I'm still in that reset process. This week, I'm only running 5 times, which when I'm full on training, I run 13, 14 times a week, right? Because I double all but maybe 1 or 2 days in the week. So I will very gradually get back up to I guess a level of homeostasis where my volume is at a very comfortable level where I can start to introduce real speed. I will do my first, gentle introduction to speed today, actually, but I wouldn't call it a big stimulus for someone like myself. It's just basically turning the legs on and spinning a little bit. Glorified strides is what I'd call it.
Mm. You know what's literally crazy and what just crossed my mind is how conscious you are about those resets and the way you will schedule the full year, as opposed to the way academics and lawyers have been in touch with and economists approach their own career. We never do such a thing, or if we do, it's totally random, but it's never like, okay, I've worked on a big paper, on a big book, so I'm going to do a hard reset now because my body needs that. This is not at all part of the discussion. And I think there is a lot we can learn from the process, which makes me want to ask, how much of your training is grounded in science versus guided by intuition?
I would say running is like the perfect blend of art and science, right? So this is something I talk about a lot because I do coach athletes as well. I am coached by someone else. So I take myself out of the science aspect of my training, other than like maybe some input here or there. I trust my coach to know that the science side of it. But I think I have a large part in the art of my own running. So like the way I approach things, the way I think about things, and I'd say as an athlete, I'm the artist, and the science part is up to my coach. The pulling of the strings, the levers, and all the things just to find that perfect balance and formula. Obviously, I'm the one in control of how hard I push, how often I run, and some of these things are I do have a say in it, but I trust my coach to nail the science aspect. Now, the things that we do that are very scientifically based, when I think of science, I think of data, right? Whether it be collecting heart rate, whether it be collecting blood lactate levels in training, we do a fair amount of that, like occasionally, but I would say it's more for me, like, how did that feel? Did that feel like you could do that for a marathon? Did that feel like 5K pace today? Do you feel like you could do 2 more repetitions in this workout? Because it is really hard to master the data in running where the variables are so out of whack. Like every day is a bit different than the last, conditions, body fatigue. So you really have to be a master at reading yourself. And that is more art than it is science, in my opinion.
All right, so let me ask a final question regarding those amazing physical abilities that you have. There is another academic concept that is known as dynamic capabilities. And it's the idea of, for a company, having the ability to sense what's happening, then to size what's happening, and therefore to adapt, to change. Now, as a professional athlete, you have no choice but to excel in this area because you have to adapt constantly. And even, in fact, for amateurs, I've heard people saying that if you follow 100% of your training plan, you probably did something wrong, because it would have been better to adapt that plan depending on what was happening in your life. So can you please tell me how adaptive your training is, and what are the lessons that you've learned over the years from adapting the process?
Yeah. This is actually a really, really interesting question, because I would say 75% of professional marathoners probably have to do this a lot more than I do. So I have this weird ability to kind of like recover super fast and just be ready for the next workout. And so I don't adapt things very frequently in the sense of like changing workouts or changing workout days, um, or changing within the workout. Usually, if my coach says do something, I do it. And it is almost always something that I have success at doing. Like I'd say once or twice a marathon block, something goes wrong or something has to be adjusted or pulled back here and there. But for the most part, the success rate and the hit rate and the going according to plan rate is very, very high for myself. Now there's other marathoners that are wildly successful that are way more on the like topsy-turvy, like unpredictable side of things. And there's a lot of questions I have about why that is. Why am I this way? Why are they that way? And I think what it is like learning what levels you can and cannot push, and being comfortable with the idea that you can fail in a workout, that you can push harder and find that forced dynamic changes that you have to make, the forced pullback, the forced adaptations that you have to make on the fly. And this is something me and my coach talked about right after New York. We were like, man, that build to New York went perfect. And my coach said, next time, I don't want it to go perfect. I want us to find that point where we have to change something because we bit off more than we could chew. So we had to pull back. We had to adjust something in that moment. And that's a concept that scares me a little bit because I do like to feel like I'm in somewhat control. But I think it's something that is the evolution of myself as an athlete. I think I need to start to be comfortable with the idea of failing more frequently and finding that edge and being willing to step off a bit and come back and regather. So this is something that I think I'm going to be playing with a lot more in 2025. I just made my first Olympic team. I have 4 years to try to improve a lot, get a lot better, and be better at the next Olympics. So I think the logical thing is to take risks in 2025 and 2026 so that in 2027 and 2028, I'm ready to take the leaps that I need to in my own performance.
That idea of being comfortable with failure also shows the interplay between those physical abilities and the mental readiness and toughness. So that's a perfect segue between those two topics that we discussed. Now, moving on to the very last part, the conclusion, I have 2 questions for you. And the first one is one that I have to ask. When is your next race? And I guess how far in advance do you typically plan those races?
Yeah, so we have to plan pretty far in advance because in the professional running world, let's say a world marathon major like the New York City Marathon only has 30 professionals that they let in. So if you don't tell them 6 months, 8 months in advance, hey, I want to run New York this year, then most likely, depending on who you are, they will fill the quota before you ask. And there's certain athletes, certainly, that are of high enough profile that if they knock, the door is opened, right? But for me, at this stage in my career, I like to communicate my plans probably 6 to 8 months in advance, but then kind of have a projection to the next 6 to 8 months as well, like kind of be thinking and brainstorming. So I do kind of have my spring 2025 planned out. My next,
which is exciting because it means you can tell us. Or maybe you cannot, but
can't tell you what marathon I'm running because there is some professional legalities of sorts, but I can tell you I'm going to run a spring marathon, and it's a big marathon, and I'm very excited for it. It's along the same lines of something I just recently did, so I can let you kind of guess what that might be.
I think I know, but I won't say.
Yeah. So, but I can tell you that I will have races between now and then, and I'm targeting specifically in hopefully late January, early February, preferred a super fast half marathon. I haven't nailed it down. I have some that I would like to do. If everything goes right, I will be in Morigame, Japan, running a half marathon the first week of February, hopefully running my best half marathon ever in kind of that same principle of what I spoke about earlier, working backwards from the marathon. That's the right time frame to, if I can run really fast half in February, I think it sets me up really well for a spring marathon. So that's kind of like the first thing that I have targeted in 2025. I'll probably do a tune-up race of sorts before that in early Jan, mid-Jan. And then maybe one more thing between that half marathon and my spring marathon. So I do have kind of like a moving schedule at the moment where nothing's quite set in stone, but I have a general target finish date and I have general ideas of what I want to do between that day and now.
Yeah, and a desire to take more risks, as you said.
Yes.
All right, let me finish with a very final question. What is the weirdest thing that ever happens to you during a marathon?
The weirdest thing. That is a tough question. I would say, like, physically, the first things that pop up is like the first time you experience like mid-race cramping or GI issues. Like those are like the worst, right? Like, and maybe they're not because they're very common in marathoning, but the first time you experience it, it feels like very alarming. Like it sets off a lot of like fight or flight mechanisms in your brain, right? Like your hamstring starts to lock up on you as you take a step. You're like, oh no, I've made it. Like you said, 30K into this race, I'm cramping. Am I really going to get this far and then not be able to finish? And you start panicking. And what I've learned over the years is like, I can actually like start to feel that thing happening and fend it off through like a lot of tactics. And I've gotten really good at pushing those things out. But I can't think of anything too odd or obscure that has happened mid-marathon, other than maybe just
No naked person running next to you, or this kind of stuff. I guess, yeah, you go too fast. That's what.
maybe that is the perk of getting to this level is you don't have a bunch of crazies running around early in the race. But yeah, people say weird things and whatnot, but I can't think of anything that off the top of my head.
Okay, all right. Well, that's, I guess, good news. But again, thank you so very much. There is a lot there to unpack. For everyone, obviously running, whether marathons or 10Ks or half marathons, and again, for all of us academics and people working in the policy world. So I'm very grateful. If my guess is correct, we might be running the same race in the spring of 2025. So very best of luck. I will try to arrive, what would that be? An hour after you arrive. That would be pretty.
There we go. Yeah, let's see.
All right. But on that, thank you so very much. And to everyone out there, take care of yourself. And if you can, someone else too. Bye-bye.
Thank you.